The first sound my wolf made in 100 years came in the middle of my own crowded fair, and it was so impossible that my hand went to my sword before my mind caught up. I want that understood at the start, because it tells you the truth of me better than any crown could. A king should not reach for steel at the sound of a song. But Call had not so much as whined since I was a boy, not through the plague winter, not the night we buried my father under the great pine, not once in all the long gray years I ruled Bramwold alone. And when his voice rose out of him, unbidden, into the lantern light, the whole animal of me thought, danger. Because in my experience, when the dead speak, something is coming to take you. Nothing was coming. That was the joke of it, though I did not know yet that it was a joke, or that I would be its punchline for the whole of that autumn. Let me set the fair down for you, so you see it as I saw it. Bramwold in harvest is the 1 week we let ourselves be soft. The rest of the year we are a hard country, pine and stone and a long border to hold, but when the last of the grain is in, the whole hold spills out onto the fairground below the hall, and for 7 nights the lanterns hang in the trees like a fallen sky. There is roast and there is mead. There are the smiths selling their off-season work, and the farm wives selling their preserves, and the children stealing honey cakes with a boldness they'll pay for come morning. My people wear their good wool and laugh too loud, and I stand at the edge of it in my gray cloak with my gray wolf at my knee, and I let them. That is the arrangement, you understand. I keep the border and the peace and the granaries full, and in return they do not ask me to laugh with them. I had made myself into a wall a long time ago, and a wall does not dance. My council had, over the years, brought me a procession of worthy daughters from worthy houses, each one poised, each one kind enough, each one looking at me the way you look at a mountain you must climb because your family requires it. I sent them all home with honor and a good escort. I told myself I had no room in me for a mate. What I meant was that I had walled the room off, along with everything else soft, and I had lost the key on purpose. Call lay at my feet that first night with his great gray head on his paws, watching the fair the way I watched it from outside. He was old for a wolf and enormous for anything, a beast the size of a pony, silver at the muzzle now, and he had been at my side since I could walk. When my father died, he had stopped making sound. Not sickness, the healers checked. He simply had nothing left to say, and neither did I, and between the two of us we had kept a very quiet hall for a very long time. And then a fiddle started up across the fairground, and Call's ears came forward. I noticed it because he never did that anymore. His ears were always half back, always braced. But they came up now, both of them, swiveling toward the far side of the fire where a knot of people had gathered around someone I couldn't see. The tune reached me a breath later, quick, bright, a little ragged, played by someone who cared more about the joy of it than the cleanness. It wasn't court music. It was road music, tavern music, the kind that makes feet move before the mind agrees. Call rose. He rose the way a much younger wolf rises, all at once, and he took 3 steps toward the sound before he seemed to remember I existed, and looked back at me over his shoulder with an expression I had not seen on his face in so long that it took me a moment to name it. It was want. Call, I said quietly, the way you'd steady a horse. He did not steady. He looked at me, and he looked at the music, and I watched some 100-year dam break behind his amber eyes, and then my wolf, my silent, grieving, iron-hearted wolf, threw back his great gray head in the middle of my harvest fair and sang. It was not a howl of alarm. I have heard those. Every man of the border has. This was low and long and aching and, worst of all, in tune. He found the fiddle's key and held under it like a second voice, like he had been waiting his whole silent life for exactly this note to lean against. The fair stopped. You have never heard a quiet like it. 100 people mid-laugh, mid-bite, mid-bargain, all of them freezing at once, and every face turning first to the wolf and then, in the next heartbeat, to me. Because they knew what Call's silence meant. They had grown up inside it. Half of them had never once heard the king's wolf make a sound, and now here he was, throat to the lanterns, singing along to a road fiddle like a drunk at a wedding. I stood there with my hand still on my sword, and no idea in the world what to do with my face. And across the fire the fiddle faltered. The player had heard him, and then, instead of stopping, the tune bent. It shifted, slowed, opened up a wider space, and I understood with a strange lurch that whoever was playing had just made room for my wolf, was playing with him now, was in front of my entire hold, in a duet with a beast that had not spoken since I was a boy. The crowd parted, the way crowds do around a king, and I walked toward the music because I could not for my life have done anything else. She was sitting on an upturned barrel with her boots hooked on the rim, a battered fiddle tucked under a stubborn chin, and she was not looking at me at all. She was looking at Call. She had eyes only for my wolf, and she was grinning at him, grinning the way you grin at an old friend who has just done something outrageous, and she drew her bow long and slow and let him climb the note with her, and when he found the top of it and held, she laughed, right into the music, delighted. I should describe her properly, though I will fail, because I have never once managed to describe her to my own satisfaction, and I have had years to try. She was road-worn. Her cloak had been rehemmed more than once by a hand that valued thrift over neatness. Her dark hair was coming out of its plait on one side, and she'd given up on it. She had the kind of face that isn't still, that is always about to do something, laugh or argue or pull a card from a sleeve. And even sitting on a barrel playing to a wolf, she looked like she was halfway to somewhere else, like the road was a thing she carried with her and might set back down under her boots at any moment. She was, in short, entirely unlike every worthy daughter my counsel had ever set before me. And something in the middle of my chest, in the walled-off room where I keep everything soft, turned over, not with the thunderclap the old tales promise, but quieter and far more dangerous, like a key turning in a lock I had sworn I'd thrown away. I did not know her name. I did not know she was mine. All I knew, standing there in my gray cloak with the whole fair holding its breath, was that my wolf had a voice again, and that she was the reason, and that I would have given a very great deal to keep both those things in the world. The tune came to its natural end. Call let his last note fall and lowered his head, and I swear this on the pine over my father's grave, he wagged his tail, once, like a pup. The fiddler lowered her bow, finally saw the size of the audience she'd gathered, and only then noticed the man in the gray cloak standing over her with an expression he'd lost control of. Her eyes went from my face to the wolf and back, and I watched her put it together, the silence, the hush, the way the crowd looked between us. And instead of the fear or the fawning I was braced for, one corner of her mouth went up. "Well," she said, "he's got a better ear than most lords I've played for." Somebody in the crowd made a strangled sound that was almost a laugh, and swallowed it hard. "He does not," I said, "have any ear at all. He has not made a sound in 100 years. 100 years. She looked at Call, who had come to sit beside her barrel with the air of a beast who had found exactly where he intended to spend the rest of his life. "You don't look 100 years old, old man." Call leaned his enormous head against her knee, nearly toppling her off the barrel, and she caught herself with a laugh and a hand in his ruff, and I felt the whole hold watching their king watch a stranger scratch his wolf's ears. "His name is Call," I heard myself say. "Elowen," she said, as if I'd asked, which I had not, and did not offer her hand, which is the road player's way. You keep your hands for your instrument and your purse. And I'm just passing through before your face does whatever it's about to do. I play a night, I take my coin, I move on before the town decides it has opinions about me." "This town," I said, "has just had its opinions rearranged by my wolf." "Then your wolf owes me half the take," she said, and this time the laugh that ran through the crowd was real, and my people were laughing near me at the fair for the first time in longer than I could count, and I stood in the middle of it not knowing whether I was furious or something I had no word for. I put a gold piece on the barrel beside her, far too much, a night's play for a month's wages, and I told myself it was because Call had disrupted her set. She looked at the coin and looked at me and did not touch it. "That's not a knight's coin," she said. "That's a keep the stranger close coin." "I know the difference, my lord. I've been paid both." I was not accustomed to being read. A king spends his life being obeyed and being feared and being flattered, and all three of those things put a comfortable distance between you and everyone else. Being read, being looked at by someone who saw the man throwing the coin and named exactly what he was doing before he'd admitted it to himself, that was new, and I did not like how much I liked it. "Play the fair the rest of the week," I said, retreating into command because it was the only ground I knew. "You'll be paid a fair wage and lodged in the hall. My wolf appears to require it." "Your wolf," she agreed gravely, "appears to require it." And then, so quietly that I think only Call and I heard it, "What about you, my lord? What do you require?" I did not answer. I turned and walked back to the edge of the fair where a wall belongs, and my gray wolf did not follow me. That is worth saying plainly, because in 100 years Call had never once not followed me. He was as much a part of my walking as my own shadow. But when I reached the dark edge of the lanterns and turned, he was still sitting at her barrel, chin on her knee, and when I made the low sound that had always brought him to heel, he looked at me, and then he looked at her and he stayed. My own wolf chose her over me the very first night. I only wish I could tell you it took me as long as it took him to understand why. They lodged her in the East Tower, which had the least draught and the best view of the fairground, and by the second morning it was clear that whatever I had begun, I had lost all control of it, because it was no longer between me and Eloin. It was between Call and Eloin, and I was merely the man who owned the wolf and was therefore, by the hold's cheerful logic, responsible for his behavior. He would not leave her. I do not mean he was fond. I mean he stationed himself outside her door like an honor guard and would not be moved. My steward, a patient old man named Harrow who had served my father and had earned the right to find me faintly ridiculous, came to me that second morning with the particular flat expression he reserves for delivering news he is enjoying. "The wolf is at the player's door, sire." "I know. He has been there since before dawn. He brought her something." I closed my eyes. "What did he bring her?" "A rabbit, sire." A pause of exquisite length. "He laid it on the threshold. Cook says it's a good one." I went up to the East Tower myself, which I told myself was to reclaim my wolf and was in fact the flimsiest excuse I have ever constructed. Call was exactly where Harrow had promised, a gray mountain across her doorway, and when he saw me, he thumped his tail against the stone and did not rise. On the threshold, precisely centered, lay a plump rabbit, arranged with what I can only call presentation. The door opened. Eloin looked down at the rabbit, and then at the wolf, and then at me, and folded her arms. "Is this a courtship?" she asked. "Because where I come from, when a beast brings you meat, that's a courtship, and I'd want to know whose intentions I'm entertaining. His," she nodded at Call, "or yours?" "He does this without instruction," I said stiffly. "Does he?" She crouched down, unbothered by the great fanged head that swung toward her, and scratched Call under the jaw until his eyes went soft and stupid with pleasure. "You'd never guess it, my lord, but your wolf has more idea of how to treat a woman than you do. He brought breakfast. You brought a keep the stranger close coin and a scowl." "I do not scowl." "You're scowling now." I was, in fact, scowling. I rearranged my face at considerable cost. "Cook will take the rabbit and make you a proper meal of it." "Cook will do no such thing." She stood and lifted the rabbit off the threshold with the ease of a woman who has dressed her own game on more roadsides than I have crossed borders. "He brought it to me. It'd be an insult to the courtship." And she winked at my wolf, over my head, as if the two of them were conspirators and I the mark, and shut the door with the rabbit and a last soft sound of laughter behind it. Call sighed the enormous, contented sigh of a beast whose scheme is proceeding on schedule. "I would like to tell you that I put a stop to it." that a king reasserted his dignity and his wolf and the ordinary running of his hall. I did not, because over the next days it became clear that the thing I had walled off for 100 years had, apparently, been keeping Call silent along with me, that his grief had been mine, worn on the outside where I would not wear my own, and now that some road fiddler had opened a window in him, the light was coming into the whole house whether I willed it or not. He sang now. Not always, not on command. She tried once to make him perform for a table of merchants, and he looked at her with such offended dignity that she apologized to him out loud. But when she played in the evenings in the hall, for the Fair Week feasts, he would find his note and lean into it, and the sound of my wolf's voice under her music did something to my people that I had not managed to do for them in all my careful years of rule. It made them love the hall. They came to the feasts early. They lingered. They looked at their grim king differently when his wolf was singing at his feet, as if the singing meant that under the gray cloak there was, after all, a man who could be reached. And she reached the wretch, constantly. She could not seem to help it. "You sit like you're guarding the chair from someone," she told me on the fourth night, dropping onto the bench beside me without the smallest ceremony, fiddle across her knees, close enough that I could smell wood smoke and rosin. "Nobody's coming for the chair, my lord. You can lean back on it." "A king does not lean." "A king does whatever he likes," she said. "That's rather the point of being king." She tuned a string by ear, tightening it a hair. "You've got everyone in this hall convinced you're made of stone. I don't believe it for a moment, and do you know why? I suspect you'll tell me. Because stone doesn't grieve." She said it lightly, but her eyes were not light at all, and I felt the words go into me under the wall like a blade finding the gap in armor. "And that wolf of yours has been grieving something for 100 years, and a wolf only grieves as long as his man does. So," she plucked a soft note, "you can tell me it's stone all you like. Call's already told me the truth." I did not have an answer. I have commanded men into battle. I have negotiated with kings who wanted my granaries and my head. I have never in my life been at such a total loss for words as I was on a mead bench beside a woman who had learned everything worth knowing about me from my wolf. "Play," I said finally, roughly, because it was the only escape I could find. "That's what you're paid for." She looked at me for a long moment, and I thought I had wounded her, and my chest ached with a swift and unfamiliar panic at the thought. But then that corner of her mouth went up. "There he is," she said softly. "The wall talks when it's cornered." And she lifted the fiddle to her chin and played, and Call found his note, and I sat there wall straight and thoroughly cornered and did not, for the whole length of the tune, want to be anywhere else in the world. Here is the thing about the bond that the old tales get wrong. They tell you it strikes like lightning, that you know your fated mate at first breath, that the wolf howls and the mark burns and the matter is settled. Perhaps for some it is like that. For me it was not lightning. For me it was the slow, mortifying, undeniable evidence of my own wolf, who knew before I did and set about, with the single-minded devotion of an old beast who has decided his man has been alone long enough to out me. He courted her on my behalf without my leave and against my dignity. When she walked the fairground he walked at her side, and the whole hold saw the king's wolf escorting the fiddler like a champion escorting a lady. When she sat to eat, he laid his head in her lap, and she fed him from her plate, and I said nothing because the alternative was to admit I noticed. When she wandered too near the outer wall at dusk, she was forever wandering, a woman who slept better knowing where the road out was. He would plant himself between her and the gate and lean his weight into her until she laughed and turned back, and I would watch from a window like a fool and understand that he was keeping her the way I wished I had the courage to. And when I was slow, when I lingered too long over the day's petitions, when I made some excuse to be in the granary rather than the hall where she played, Call came and got me. He did it first on the 5th evening. I was in the map room with Harrow, deliberately, cowardly, going over the border tallies I could have gone over any day of the year, and I heard her fiddle start up in the hall 2 floors below, and I bent my head to the tallies and did not go. A little while later there were claws on the stair. Call shouldered the door open. He had learned the trick of the latch decades ago and used it perhaps twice a year, and crossed the map room and took the hem of my cloak in his teeth and pulled. Call, I did not look up. I am working. He pulled harder. Harrow made a sound of profound and treacherous amusement. Sire, said my steward, I believe the wolf has an opinion about your working. Call set his haunches and hauled with the full weight of a beast the size of a pony, and there is a limit to the dignity a king can maintain while being dragged from his own map room by his own wolf in front of his own smirking steward, and I reached it. I went. I let a 100-year-old wolf tow me down 2 flights of stairs and into the hall, where Aloan looked up from her playing, took in the wolf, the cloak in his teeth. The king attached to the far end of it, and very nearly dropped her bow laughing. He fetched you, she said, delighted beyond measure. He did not fetch me. I was coming down regardless. He fetched you like a stick, my lord. She was laughing so hard now that the tune had entirely stopped. He went up 2 floors and fetched the king like a stick. The hall was laughing with her. My whole hall, the border-hard men and the tired farm wives and the honey-thieving children, all of them laughing, not at me, I understood slowly, but at the wonderful ridiculousness of it, at the gray wall of a king being hauled to the music by the wolf who loved the fiddler. And there was such warmth in it, such an ease that my rule had never once bought them, that I felt the wall crack clean across. I sat down on the mead bench in the middle of their laughter. And I did not decide to. My body did it before my pride could object. I reached down and took my wolf's great gray head in both my hands and pressed my forehead to his, the way I had not done since I was a boy, since before the silence, and Call made a low sound that was almost a word, and the hall went quiet and soft around us. Aloan lifted her fiddle, very gently this time, and she played something slow, something with room in it, and Call sat back on his haunches beside me and found his note, and I stayed there in the light with my hand on my singing wolf and let the whole hall watch their king be, for the first time in 100 years, a man. She caught me afterward at the edge of the hall when the feast was breaking up. You held your own wolf like you were saying goodbye to him, she said quietly, no teasing in it now. Why? I could have walled her out. I was very good at walling people out. I had had a lifetime of practice. But Call was leaning against my leg, warm and heavy and voiced, and the wall had already cracked, and I was tired, bone-tired in a way I had not let myself feel of being alone inside the stone. My father died when I was a boy, I said. In the plague winter. I held the hold together because there was no one else to do it and I could not afford to grieve, so I put the grief somewhere I could not reach it. And Call, I looked down at him. Call grieved for both of us. He went silent because I would not weep. And I let him carry it for 100 years, because it was easier than carrying it myself. She was quiet for a moment. And then I came along, she said, and made him sing. And then you came along, I agreed, and made him sing. I looked at her, and I did not wall it out of my face, whatever it was. I am not certain, Mistress Fiddler, whether to thank you or to fear you. You have undone 100 years of my careful work in 5 nights, with a rode fiddle and a scratch behind my wolf's ears. That's the trouble with careful work, she said. Her voice had gone gentle, but her eyes were bright. It only holds until something worth ruining it comes along. And then, because she could not bear a moment to be too tender any more than I could bear one to be too soft, she added, also I'm an excellent fiddler. Don't undersell the fiddle. I would not dream of underselling the fiddle. Good, she hitched her cloak, because I'll be gone at week's end and you'll want a fair memory of it. The whole warm evening went cold in me. Gone, I said. That's what road players do, my lord. She said it easily, but I had learned by then to hear the thing under the ease, and there was something under it now, some old wound she carried the way I carried mine. We play the weak, we take the coin, we go before the town decides it has opinions. I've stayed in one place too long exactly once in my life. I don't recommend it. The leaving hurts worse the longer you wait. And she went up to the east tower with my wolf padding at her heels, and I stood in the emptying hall and understood, with the particular clarity of a man who has been slow and is now abruptly, terribly caught up, that in 3 days she meant to walk out of my gate and take the music and my wolf's voice and the light in my whole house with her, back onto a road I could not follow. Call came back down the stairs a little later without her. I think he could not decide, that night, which of us to guard, and lay at my feet, and I sat alone in the dark hall with my hand in his ruff. 3 days, I said to him. He looked at me with those amber eyes, and I swear to you there was an accusation in them. 100 years I waited, the look said. 100 years I was quiet for you. And now she is here, and you will let her walk out the gate, and I will go silent again, and this time it will be your fault and not the plague's. I know, I said, I know. But knowing a thing and having the courage for it are two different countries, and I had lived my whole life a citizen of the first and a stranger to the second. I did the coward's thing first. I tried to buy her. I had Harrow draw up a place for her, court musician, a proper title, a proper stipend, chambers in the hall, the security a road player never has. I told myself it was sensible. A hold should have a musician. My people had bloomed under her playing. It was a decision a king could defend to his council with a straight face, and it required me to risk nothing at all. I put it to her the next morning in the map room, across the wide table, in my most reasonable voice. She heard me out. She stood on the far side of the table with her fiddle case slung on her back. She was never without it. I think it was the one thing in the world she trusted not to leave her, and she heard the whole reasonable offer, the title and the stipend and the chambers, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment, and then she laughed, but it was not her good laugh. It was a small, tired one. A court musician, she said, a stipend and chambers and a title. You'd cage me very comfortably, my lord. It is not a cage, it is a place. I reached for it, a belonging. It's a post. She set her hands flat on the table and leaned into them. You'd own my playing the way you own the granaries. I'd play what the hall wanted when the hall wanted, and I'd be paid, and I'd be safe, and in a year I'd be a fine-kept fiddler who used to be free, and I'd hate you for it, and I'd hate myself worse. She shook her head. I've been offered posts before, Torin. It was the first time she had used my name without the my lord in front of it, and it landed in the middle of my chest like a struck note. Rich men love to offer a road woman a post. What they mean is, stop being the thing I fell for and become a thing I can keep on a shelf. And I always say no, and I always leave, and the leaving always hurts, and I always heal on the road. That's the shape of my life. I made my peace with it a long time ago. And if I did not want to keep you on a shelf, I said, my voice was not steady. I did not try to make it steady. If I did not want the fiddler, if I wanted. I could not say it. 100 years of wall does not come down in a single sentence. I stood there, a king, with the word in my mouth and no way to get it past the stone. She waited. She let me stand in it, and there was no cruelty in her waiting, only a terrible patience, as if she knew exactly how heavy the word was because she carried the twin of it herself. But I could not. And her face, when she understood I could not, did something I have never forgiven myself for. It closed, gently, like a door in the east tower on a cold morning. She had opened a window in my wolf and in me, and I had let her stand in the draught of my cowardice until she had to close it herself to keep warm. Right, she said quietly, that's what I thought. Eloin, I'll play the last 2 nights of the fair. I gave my word to the hold and I keep my word. She hitched the fiddle case higher on her shoulder, and I saw her rebuild herself as she stood there, saw her put the road back under her boots inside her own mind. And then I'll go, and you'll have a fair memory of it, like I said. Your wolf found his voice. That's a good thing, whatever else. Hold on to that. She left the map room. Call, who had been lying by the cold hearth, rose to follow her, and then stopped in the doorway, torn, and looked back at me with an expression I will carry to my grave. He did not sing that night. I noticed it the way you notice a fire has gone out not at once but by the growing cold. She played the sixth night, the second to last, and the hall gathered as it had all week, and she played beautifully, and my wolf lay at the foot of the dais with his head on his paws and did not lift it. He knew. Of course he knew. She was leaving and I was letting her, and the silence was coming back, and he had already begun to sink into it the way an old man sinks into a familiar cold. My people noticed too. The laughter was thinner that night. They had grown used, in a week, to the king's wolf singing, and its absence sat on the hall like weather. I sat on my dais in my gray cloak and watched the light I had briefly been given start to go out of my own house, and I understood that this was the future I was choosing, not by any decision, but by the absence of one, by staying safely behind the wall while everything worth wanting walked toward the gate. That night I did not sleep. I walked the battlements in the cold, the way I had walked them the night my father died, and somewhere past the middle of the night Call came and found me, climbed the tower stair and came and stood beside me at the parapet, and we looked out at the dark pines together the way we had done for 100 years. "You blame me," I said to him. He did not sing. He did not need to. He leaned his great gray weight against my leg, and it was not comfort. It was petition. It was an old wolf at the end of a long silence, asking his man for the one thing his man had never once managed to give. Not duty, not endurance, not the grim holding together of a hard country, but the courage to want something and say so. I held the hold together, I told him. I kept the border, I kept the granaries full, I kept us alive. Was that not enough? Was 100 years of that not enough? He looked up at me. And in the moonlight, for just a moment, my silent wolf made a sound, the smallest sound, barely a breath of a note, a single low-reaching thing thrown out into the dark toward the east tower where she slept. And then he let it fall because she was leaving, and what was the use? And that broke me where all the rest had failed. Because I understood, standing on the cold battlement with my grieving wolf, that I had spent 100 years believing that keeping my people alive was the same as loving them, that duty was the same as devotion, that a wall could be a kind of care, and it was not. My father had not built walls. My father had laughed in that hall. I could remember it if I let myself, a great warm sound rolling off the pine rafters. He had held the hold together with his hands and warmed it with his heart, both at once. And I had taken only the first half of him as my inheritance, because the second half had died with him, and I had not been brave enough to grieve it back into the world. She had brought it back. In a week. With a rode fiddle and a scratch behind my wolf's ears, she had reached into the walled room and turned the key I swore I'd thrown away, and my wolf had sung, and my hall had laughed, and my whole hard country had, for 7 soft nights, been warm. And I was going to let her walk out the gate to keep from saying one word. "No," I said aloud, to the pines, to the moon, to the wolf, to my dead father, to the whole gray century of myself. "No, not this time." Call's ears came up. I did not go to her that night. There is a right way to do a thing and a wrong one, and hammering on a woman's door before dawn to unsay a day of cowardice is the wrong one. I let her have the night, but I did not sleep. And I did not walk the battlements as a wall any more. I sat in the great hall in the dark and I thought, harder than I have ever thought over any border tally, about what I actually had to offer a woman who had spent her whole life refusing to be kept on a shelf. Not a post, not a title, not a comfortable cage. I had to offer her the one thing I had never offered anyone, myself, without the wall. And I had to offer it in a way that left every door open, that made staying a thing she chose, freely, and not a thing she was talked or paid or trapped into. Because if I closed a single door on Aloan, she would be gone through the window before I finished speaking, and she would be right to go. The last night of the fair came clear and cold. The lanterns hung in the pines like a fallen sky one final time, and the whole hold gathered for the closing feast. And Aloan played. She played her whole heart out that night, I think because she was leaving and this was her farewell to a hold that had been kind to her, and it was the best she'd played all week, quick and bright and aching by turns, and the hall loved her for it. Bacall lay at the foot of the dais with his head down and did not sing, and every soul in that hall who had heard him sing all week felt the wound of his silence, and I saw more than one of my people glance up at their king on his dais with something that was almost reproach. "You did this," the glances said. "You had the singing wolf and the laughing hall and the woman who brought them, and you are letting her go, and you are letting him go quiet again, and we do not understand you." I did not understand me either, not the old me, but I was done being him. When she brought the last tune to its close and lowered her bow, and the hall roared for her the way it had roared all week, I rose from my dais. The hall quieted. A king rising is a thing people notice. I came down off the dais, and I did a thing I had never done, that no king of Bramwold had done in living memory. I unclasped my gray cloak, the cloak of my office, the great heavy gray wall of wool I had worn like armor for 100 years, and I let it fall from my shoulders onto the flagstones of my own hall. A gasp went round the room. Harrow by the wall went very still. I crossed to where Aloan stood by her upturned barrel, fiddle in one hand, bow in the other, watching me come with an expression that could not decide what it was. "I made you an offer yesterday," I said. I did not lower my voice. I let the whole hall have it because I had hidden behind walls too long and I was finished hiding. "A post, a stipend, chambers. A cage with the door left ajar so I could tell myself it wasn't a cage. You saw it for what it was, and you were right, and I have been ashamed of it ever since." She did not move. The fiddle hung forgotten in her hand. "So let me make you a different offer, and hear all of it before you answer because I am going to do it badly. I have 100 years of practice at not saying things and none at all at saying them." I drew a breath. Call had lifted his head off his paws. "I have kept this hold my whole life. I kept it alive. I mistook keeping it alive for loving it, and I mistook a wall for care, and I have been so busy being its king that I forgot how to be a man in it. My wolf grieved for 100 years because I would not. My hall did not laugh for 100 years because I would not. And then a road fiddler climbed up on a barrel and made my wolf sing, and my hall laugh, and me. My voice broke, I let it. A king's voice breaking in his own hall, and I did not care. Me remember that I am a man, and that there is a room in me I walled off 100 years ago, and that you found the door." The hall was so silent, I could hear the lanterns creak in the wind outside. "I am not offering you a post, Aloan. I am offering you me. The whole gray ruined century of me, wall and all, the walls coming down, but the rubble's a mess, I'll not pretend otherwise. I am asking you to stay, not as my musician. As my mate, if the bond you've heard in my wolf is a bond you feel too, and if it is not, if what you feel is only fondness and a good week's playing, then you will tell me so and I will have you escorted to whatever road you choose with a full purse and my thanks and my wolf's, and I will not say one word to hold you." I made myself say the last of it, the hardest part, the part that left the door open. "The gate is open. It stays open. Whatever you answer, you are free, you have always been free, and I would not have you any other way because it is your freeness I fell for. So, there it is, badly done like I warned you." I spread my empty hands. "I want you to stay, and I want you to be free to go, and I am asking you to choose." For a long moment she did not speak. "And call my wolf, my gray wolf, silent all night. Silent since I was a boy, rose from the foot of the dais and crossed the hall and came to stand between us, and looked up at Aloan, and threw back his great head and sang. Loud and long and aching and glad, right up into the pine rafters, the way my father used to laugh, and it was not a performance and it was not on command. It was my wolf saying the thing my whole hall was thinking, the thing I had finally managed to say. Stay, stay. We have been quiet for 100 years, please stay. Eloan looked at the singing wolf, and then she looked at me, and her eyes were bright and full, and her chin was doing its stubborn thing to keep from trembling, and when she spoke her voice was rough as a road. "Do you know," she said, "how many times I've packed my case at the end of a good week and walked out a gate because staying hurts worse than leaving?" She swallowed. "Every time, my whole life, because the leaving's a wound I know how to heal and the staying's a wound I don't, and I told myself that was freedom." A tear went down her cheek and she let it, the way I had let my voice break. "But that's not freedom, is it? That's just a different wall. Yours is gray wool, and mine's a fiddle case and a road. And we've both been hiding behind them so long we forgot they were walls at all." Call leaned his weight against her legs. She put her hand in his ruff without looking down, the way you touch a thing you have decided to keep. "You left the gate open," she said to me. "That's the whole of it, Torin. Every other man who ever asked me to stay was really asking me to be kept. You're the first one who asked me to stay and handed me the key to the gate in the same breath." She laughed, wet and helpless. "You great gray fool. Don't you know that's the only way anyone would ever say yes?" The hall did not breathe. "Is that a yes?" I said. I had faced down armies with more composure. "It's a yes." She said it, and then she said it again, louder, so the whole hall could have it, the way I'd given them the whole of my asking. "It's a yes, you impossible man. Put your cloak back on before you catch your death. A king ruining his best wool on the flagstones. Honestly." I did not put my cloak back on. I crossed the last step between us, and there in the middle of my own hall, in front of my whole hold and my singing wolf, I took her face in my hands. Gently, the way I had learned gentleness from watching my wolf court her all week. And I did not care that 100 people were watching their gray king undone, because I was undone, gladly, finally, wholly, and I would be undone every day of my life given the chance. The hall erupted. I have led men to victories that were cheered less. The border-hard men and the tired farm wives and the honey-thieving children roared and stamped and wept, and someone started up a tune on a pipe, and someone else caught it on a drum, and my hall, my grim, careful, 100-year silent hall, broke into music and dancing on the flagstones where my gray cloak still lay forgotten, and I held my fiddler in the middle of it while my wolf sang over us both. She did not stop wandering. I want to tell you that because it is the truest thing about how it ended, which is to say how it began. I had feared in the small cowardly hours that keeping her would mean caging her after all, that the road in her would sicken behind stone walls no matter how open I left the gate. But I had misunderstood the road, the way I had misunderstood so much. The road had never been the point. The point had been the freedom, and the freedom I could give her whole. So we ride the border together, my mate and I, in the good seasons. She plays the far villages that a king's justice rarely reaches, and they love her, and through her they come to love the grim king who rides at her side and is, it turns out, not so grim once his wolf gets to singing. She made the whole country warm the way she made the hall warm. She reaches people I spent 100 years failing to reach, and she does it with a road fiddle and that stubborn chin, and I have long since stopped being surprised by it and simply love her for it. Call never went silent again. He is very old now, and he sleeps most of the day at the foot of our hearth, but he still finds his note when she plays of an evening, and it is a rustier note than it was, and it is the best sound in my kingdom. He knew before I did. He always knew. When our first child was born, a daughter, with her mother's stubborn chin and, God help us all, her mother's ear, it was Call who lay across the nursery threshold like an honor guard, and it was Call who sang the child to sleep her whole first winter, and I have never once told him he was right, because he is insufferable enough already and he knows. Harrow, who found me faintly ridiculous for 40 years, wept openly at the wedding and denied it for a decade. I keep the gray cloak. I wear it still for the cold and the council and the border riding, but it is not a wall anymore, only a cloak, and on the nights when Eloan plays in the hall and Call sings and the whole hold gathers warm around the fire, I hang it on its peg by the door, and I sit on the mead bench and lean back on the chair like a man who is not guarding it from anyone, because no one is coming for it, and my mate told me so, and she was right about that the way she was right about everything that mattered. There is a thing she said to me, that last night of the fair before the hall erupted, that I have kept closer than my crown. She had her hand in my wolf's ruff and her eyes on mine, and she said it very quietly, just for me, under the singing. You spend 100 years learning to keep everything out. Spend the rest of them letting me in. It's harder work and it's better, and you won't do it alone. I did not answer her in words. I have never been good with words, whatever this long telling might suggest. I saved up 100 years of them and spent them all in one night and have been rationing ever since. But I put my cloak on its peg, and I leaned back on the chair, and I let her in. And in a hall that had been silent for 100 years, my wolf sings every night, and no one who hears him would ever believe there was a time he had nothing left to say.